Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Reganelite here with another Snowflakes Talks, and today I have a very, very special guest with me. And it's funny that of all the weeks that I have her, it happened to be during the week of the 10-year anniversary of the vote for the Scottish independence vote as well. What a funny coincidence, Jenny from Random Scottish History. How are you doing this evening?
I'm very well, love. How are you?
I'm I'm very good. I'm very excited actually to talk. There's so much to talk about today, and thanks everybody for coming along. I hope you guys enjoyed the discussion today. There's so much to talk about. I mean, I suppose the staff will talk a little bit before Steve. We'll talk about the referendum, and we'll talk a bit about Scottish politics. But let's talk a little bit about you and about your channel and about the page. So first and foremost, I suppose a bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself and basically where did this love for Scottish history come from? Is it something that you've always been passionate about, or is it something you grew into? Like, how did it all start for you?
I was always super interested in history. Like it was one of my favorite subjects at school.
Hmm.
But we didn't really get Scottish history in school, so I was never in a position to be able to differentiate Scottish history from British history because it's a British history we get taught in
Yeah.
school. So you learn all about Henry VIII and Queen Liz the First
Yeah.
and the Armada and all of these wins, which
Hmm.
have absolutely nothing to do with Scotland, but
Yeah.
we're taught it, just so that we're given the full British history. Then I mean, my historical focus after school really lay with Victorian London.
Hmm.
I love everything Victorian London because the very idea that a single person made it out alive
Yeah.
is just crazy, like to me. And classical Greek, Roman history,
Yeah.
the old gods and myths and legends and everything.
Yeah.
And so when I was night shift at my old job, there was a lot of downtime. There's just a lot of sitting about not doing anything. So I thought I might as well be productive because I can't sit and do nothing. That drives me just
You
mental.
like keeping yourself busy. You're not someone that just
Gotta be doing something. There's
yeah.
always got to be something on the go.
Mm.
So I thought, well, I'll do something history related, and I did an arts and humanities degree course with the Open University,
Hmm.
and that was just to fill my time, like at work. And in doing that, I came to find out just how easy it was to obtain like original source material. So
Mm.
um, the the subject that I got most into with the university was Benin. So in 1897, the British Army went over to Benin and decimated the place, burned the whole place, killed loads of people, robbed them of a lot of stuff that's still in the British Museum, and sold off a lot of what they'd stolen to other countries, basically to pay for this expedition. And it was an act of vengeance by the British Army because of a mistake they made the preceding year. So just excellent. But I was never into just sticking with the university materials. I was
Mm.
always looking outside, but I wanted as much information on whatever it was we were talking about as possible. So doing the Benin subject, I'd gone looking for it was in the London Illustrated News, and it was a supplement that came with this particular copy of the London Illustrated News, and it covered the Benin expedition along with pictures and inside details and everything. So I obtained a copy, and I couldn't believe that there was even a copy that could be bought, and it was like £6 or something. I'm like, what the like this is like an
Yeah.
antique I'm holding and it cost me nothing, and what the hell.
Mm.
And then the referendum was called in Scotland,
Mm.
and I was going to vote no. I had been brought up to vote no by Tory voting parents, and I had been brought up with the mentality that if Scotland were to go it alone, and secede from the Union, that it would become the non-PC term of a third world country, that we would just drive ourselves into the ground and we would be crawling back to Westminster eventually. But then I started wondering why that was the case. Like, I was really just going on what I'd been told and brought up believing. There was no hard evidence to support that idea. So I left the Open University with a view to devote my time to getting in about Scotland's history. And I didn't want anything post World Wars, which is why I'm a pre-20th century collector of all this literature behind me. And because I felt like the World Wars tainted the history with a really super British bias. There was no better propaganda for Westminster keeping Scotland in the Union than we are all one people, one nation in this together against this enemy. And that worked so well that the movement amongst Scots, which up until that point had been really a movement aimed at obtaining home rule from Westminster, not like secession from the Union. It was home rule that Scots wanted. They wanted a federal union. And the World Wars got in the way of that fight. And after the World Wars, there was complete apathy. There was no appetite, no discussion in Scotland about home rule anymore. There was no discussion about, like, the idea of leaving the Union was already something that wasn't common. Scots prior to the World Wars did want the Union, but solely on the basis that it was going to be of benefit to Scotland, that we were in fact going to be equals within the Union. And the home rule argument came about because they were realizing that it wasn't happening, that we weren't getting a say over our own affairs, that every time a purely Scottish vote came up in Westminster, it would be voted down. And it happened so often that it just smacked of spite. It just smacked of vindictiveness from the opposition in Westminster and the English members of Parliament, and that they were doing it just for the sake of being able to say no to a thing. Because these were policies that had no bearing on them. It wouldn't have affected them at all, but they would just vote it down for the sake of it. But Scots don't need that, forget it. So it wasn't until the 60s that this movement was revived. And I think at that point, the people that did that and formed the SNP in its infancy at that time really had looked at history. I think they'd seen the fight for the same things that we kept getting knocked back, like from the time of the Union. And I think they also saw that the fight for home rule was one that wasn't coming to anything, that it was never something that we were going to get. And at that point, actually ending the Union became the goal, because we tried everything else. We hadn't tried ending the Union, so that became the main cause. And in learning about Scottish history and collecting my books and lithographs and newspapers and information, just learning about my country actually made me want what was best for it. And there was nothing that I had come across to suggest that we were going to be stymied if we were to secede. There was nothing to suggest that what I'd been brought up believing was actually fact. And so when the referendum came around, I felt like I was far better informed and better prepared to make a vote, and I voted for yes to leave the Union. My dad actually blocked me on Facebook because he realised that I'd changed my mind, that I was no longer on sides. And his argument was that I was on the wrong side of history, and that only the poor and Celtic supporters were going to be voting for yes, which says something about the man. So I shared with him the Rangers for yes Facebook page, and at that point I was blocked. He was like, nah, like you're not my friend anymore. You know?
Is it
I
is
had
it
an
fair to,
aunt. Hmm?
I was just going to say, is it fair to say, like, because it's really fascinating to hear that, you've grown up, obviously, already being into history and whatnot, but it never
Yeah.
really occurred to you. It never really occurred to you. I guess, is it fair to say around, like, because listening to what you were saying, was it fair to say around the time, obviously, when the independence referendum was called, when it was decided to vote, is that where the point where something triggered in you about Scottish history itself? Is that fair to say? Because you didn't
It
really think about it before then, did you?
No, that was the catalyst. The referendum being called was the catalyst that made me decide to focus on Scotland at all.
Mm,
And it was purely because I didn't feel like I was informed enough that the referendum was a super important vote on a super important issue that would completely change the future of Scotland. Like
mhm.
if we were to vote yes. Um, and because it was so important, I felt like I did need to be informed in order to vote, which was apparently the contrary view to people voting for Brexit. But so that was what directed me to Scottish history. I just wanted to know a bit more about my country,
Mm,
um, because even though I'd been brought up learning Scottish history, I'd been brought up as a no voting Tory, etc. I wasn't blind to the fact that Scotland was a country in its own right with a
yeah.
separate history from England. Um, it was just that the propaganda going about by the British mainstream media and um, others of that type was really to amalgamate everything. It was
Mm,
almost as if they were trying to ignore our separate histories, ignore our separate traditions and customs, and make something that was an amalgamation of all, that it was just Britishness,
yeah.
that couldn't be broken apart and separated in any way.
Mm,
But I knew Scotland was a country of its own, and I knew it hadn't always been in the Union, and I wanted to know how how the Union had affected Scotland. I mean, the history books that I was reading, what changed my mind wasn't anything political. I didn't get into anything political. I literally just read up on the history of my country,
mm,
and to know a thing is to want what's best for it, and
yes.
that's exactly how it turned out for me. So that was why I set up Random Scottish History with a view to giving people the resources I had access to. So my nights at my old job were suddenly spent typing up entire books, including footnotes and everything, just so people had access and they could search for it. Because I was, it had started by just posting JPEGs of the information to a Facebook page. I wanted it to be searchable, so I just typed it all up from
Mm,
scratch and just put it all on a website so that people could find what they were looking for. It didn't actually get political until after the referendum, and that was when a Scottish author called David Taylor got hold of me on Twitter, and he was like, "Right, I'm doing a project, and I know you're not like politically based. You're just a history site, really. But I'm wondering if you would be able to source correspondence from me. What I'm looking for is Scots who are pro-union but aren't afraid to air their grievances. They're not afraid to write to friends or whoever and say, listen, I'm a fan of the union, but this is a problem, or this needs to change, or how did we end up in this position?" And I was like, of course I can fucking do that. Like, all it is newspaper research. That's all
yeah.
newspapers are, is correspondence and people's opinions. So I
Mm,
went to the papers from 1700 to 1900, and then ended up, I got hold of him. I was like, listen, there is so much valuable information in the stuff that I'm finding here. And you're welcome to everything. And I was sent him a link to all of my research. But I was like, I am going to need to publish this, like, it as a standalone thing,
mm,
because so many people were reading like the little snapshots of articles
yeah.
that I was posting to social media, and they're like, oh my God, that guy's totally right. Like, I never even thought about it that way. And I'm like, right, you're saying that he's right in answer to whatever contemporary question. This was published 230 years ago. And they're like, what the fuck? I'm like, it just shows you, all it does is show you that we've been going in circles. We've been fighting the same fights, asking for the same things, seeking the same equality from the union since day dot, and nothing has changed. We've tried to make it equal. It didn't work. We tried to gain home rule to make it a little more equal so we could at least decide our own Scotland specific matters, and it didn't work. Now we're at the point where we just have to leave the union because they're forgiving us nothing. You know, there's no leeway there, you know. So that at that point, that was when Random Scottish History got a little bit political, but I didn't enjoy that a lot.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be accessible to everyone. I didn't. I'm not the kind of. I don't know how to word it. It's like I am not a fan of anybody trying to change someone else's opinions or choices. Like I'm never going to tell a person you better vote this way. You know, as long as you're making it to the poll station at all, I don't give a fuck how you vote. If you feel you're informed enough to make the vote in the first place, I don't care. Do you know what I mean?
You
Vote
didn't
how
want to
you
be
feel
you
you
didn't want to
want
be
to, you know?
tribalism in any way, shape, or form. It's like, here's the history. This
Yeah,
is what I've looked at. You can make your own decision yourself. I'm not going to make the choice for
exactly.
you. Have a look at what I've look at look at the history that I've gathered, and make a
Yeah.
judgment call for yourself.
And even though the Treaty of Union Articles book that we published was political, it
Mm,
was from a perspective that was kind of on side with my ethos anyway,
yeah,
in that it's written by 99.9% pro-unionists telling you what's wrong with the union. Because
that's
that was the homework. The
that's
homework was get me
fascinating.
correspondence from pro-unionists that have a grievance with the union. And I was able to publish an entire book full of people's like opinions that exactly fit that bill. So I
Yeah,
had unionists that were supporting the site. I'm saying, well, I've come out with this book. Would you like a copy? And they're like, no, 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 I'm not on side with independent. I'm not on side with leaving the union. And I'm like, yeah, but it's written by pro-unionists. So are you sure? And they're like, oh, if it's written by pro-unionists, then he's a copy. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Because it doesn't matter what side of the spectrum you came from. If you're a pro-unionist, these are pro-unionists talking
mm,
to you. If you're not a pro-unionist, if you're a nationalist, then they're telling you what you already believe. Do you know what I
mm.
mean? Like they're just backing up why you're right to believe what you do, you know? So
Yeah. It's really fascinating, actually, where that the the the, the history that you're sharing here about how that people generally strongly still believe in the union. Even now, there are still those who
yeah.
will still strongly believe in the union, but obviously feel a great deal of grievances, and not just obviously with Brexit, but because of their history and the relationship that Scotland has had with Westminster, and how they've just not been able to get things that they want, that they feel that
Yeah.
they know that they should have, that they should feel entitled to, and they feel
Mhm.
it's always been this case throughout the history, that it's never been an equal relationship in any way, shape, or
So
form.
it also shows you all of the roadblocks that Westminster have ever put in the way of progress in Scotland. That
Mm,
the very fact that we're doing as well as we are, that the Scottish government is in a place to be able to mitigate Westminster cuts, etc., and Westminster policies, is despite all the roadblocks that Westminster keep throwing up. And that alone like tells you that Scotland would do really well without being constantly hampered from a government that's hundreds of miles away from us, you know?
mm,
Effectively a foreign government, especially after the general election just there. I had
yeah,
people messaging me all over the place going, I can't believe I've got an English MP now. Like my MP has already fucked off back to their place down in England, like
yeah,
questioning how often they were ever going to have like, you know, open days where people could go and address anything. Because if they're not even in the country, like
Yeah. What
No,
do you what do you think generally happened at the general election for Scotland? Do you feel that happened?
well, Scots were told that it was in their interest to oust the Tories. Everyone was told,
Hmm.
you need to vote Labour to oust the Tories, and everyone wanted the Tories gone so much that a large swathe of the country bought into that shit, when the propaganda, the news that Scots should have been receiving was the fact that they were going to shift the Tories despite the Scottish vote, that the Scottish vote has never made a difference to any general election, that
Yeah.
Scots could have looked out for themselves and voted overwhelmingly for the SNP, and Labour would have still beat out the Tories at Westminster.
Hmm.
But they apparently weren't aware of that, or it wasn't brought to their attention enough that
I definitely
their
had that.
vote meant absolutely nothing, and all they've done is shoot themselves in the foot, which I believe we're going to see at the next Holyrood elections, especially with Labour not really coming up to what people expected from them,
Yeah.
that they really are just furthering Tory policies,
It does.
you
It does.
know?
It does appear. It does feel that way. Obviously, given there's someone on the outside listening to the two Davies and what I'm
Mm,
hearing from there. But I actually I definitely felt when obviously in the run up to the general election and after that there was obviously this consensus that without I think across the whole of not just England and or Wales and Scotland that we had to get the Tories out. But you're absolutely right. A part of me does think like why did people feel they needed to vote Labour? They didn't have to vote Labour to oust the Conservatives in Scotland because they don't have that much say in Scotland anyway. And
yeah.
I don't even recall when was the last time that Conservatives had any power whatsoever in Scotland. Have they ever even had any power in Scotland, as far as I'm aware? I don't think they've had. It's
It's been a good half century since they even had the foot in the door, I think. Like,
yeah, it's always been Labour for such a long time, hasn't it?
yeah.
So
And I
uh,
do think that that's another aspect to the recent GE, where not only were people thinking, well, if I vote Labour, then the Tories will definitely not be in the hot seat
yeah,
afterwards. But I think there were a lot of people that felt like they were kind of going back to their roots, because Scotland was traditionally a Labour stronghold for the
mm,
main, that a lot of people were voting Labour just because their dads had voted Labour and their granddads had voted Labour. And I think a lot of people kind of, they didn't see the problems with it because of history and the fact
yeah,
that their family had voted that way previously, and they felt like they were contributing to outing the Tories. They felt like they were contributing for an overall beneficial
yeah.
outcome, without realizing that they didn't need to. They could have focused on themselves. They could have voted in their own interest, and the outcome would have been exactly the same, except they wouldn't necessarily have had English MPs that weren't prepared to do anything for the areas they were suddenly in charge of,
Yeah.
So
Is it fair to say obviously there were obviously some factors obviously with the do you think there was also there was a couple of things that I think. Do you think there was potentially some fatigue with the SNP as well because they've been in control for such a long period? Do you think maybe that may have played a part as well? And also, obviously, there was obviously as Nicola Sturgeon stepped down, Hamza Yusuf came in, and then there was obviously the breakup with the coalition with the Greens, and yeah, all these things kind of just come at the wrong time as well. That actually contributed to as well, and not just a case of just getting rid of the Conservatives.
maybe, but I mean, if you consider that the Tories kind of followed the same-ish path, where they were just destructive to people's finances and
Mm,
general days of just living, just getting by, that they also changed prime minister how many times in what kind of periods
too many
between
times.
Cameron and Sunak? That
Let's
was
see.
quite a lot.
Cameron,
You know?
May,
Yeah.
Boris Johnson,
and they
Liz
they
Truss, Rishi Sunak, five
and they
Conservative.
had like ties with the Lib Dems, and then they had ties with the DUP, and they all fell through,
Mm,
and yet they kept getting voted in. So the SNP might have changed leadership a little bit at Holyrood, and they might have split up with the Greens, that nice wee coalition that they had, but they weren't nearly as destructive to people's lives. Yet they didn't seem as able to hold on to the votes despite being better than the Tories in a lot of respects. It kind of didn't make sense to me. I mean, I certainly think that what you're saying did play a certain part with the section that I'm suggesting were quite happy to vote for Labour just because that's how the family had voted previously. I think they were like, oh, do you know what? I've been voting SNP and I've not really seen any change. There's a goal in mind here and they're not really achieving the goals. So like, what harm can it do just to vote Labour like this time around, kind of thing?
Yeah.
And we're seeing that in Scotland. We're seeing that the people that were voted into constituencies from Labour, and there's a large number just do not give a crap about the places that they've been voted in to lead. I think they were hoping, and I was certainly hoping, that it would mean that Scotland had at least some voice at Westminster, because the SNP are so ignorable in Westminster. As a faction, as a bloc in Westminster, everyone not SNP is quite willing just to blank them and ignore them and not answer questions and give the same non-answers to stuff because they're like, oh, it's just the SNP. And maybe some people thought that if they had Labour people with a vested interest in at least some areas in Scotland, that maybe we would be better off, but it is not going that way. I think the election is going to prove a bit of a lesson to those that gave up their votes from the SNP. That's why I think there's going to be a strong return come the Holyrood elections.
They're
because
definitely...
I think a lot of people up here are regretting having like decided that Labour were it for this time. I think there's a lot of people regretting their votes still.
I think there's a lot of that in Wales as well as perhaps those in England, especially with the recent events around.
They were under a Labour leadership anyway, like in their devolved parliament.
But they've had that.
They kind of already knew what to expect a little bit.
That's true, but I obviously we don't have a Welsh representative on here, but it does feel like to me like obviously it's completely different all to have together. But I do wonder, obviously, I do feel like that having the same political party in control, I do wonder if some of that fatigue come in. And obviously, after the vote, there was still this consensus, obviously, that the belief came back, obviously, because promises that were broken from the 2014 independence referendum, which obviously was this 10 years ago this week. And obviously there was obviously I don't really want to bring up polls, obviously, but do you feel 10 years on, it's been 10 years now since that vote?
Yeah.
What's your general feeling when you talk to people and when you hear from people? Is there still because obviously after the general election there were from my perspective there was a sense of real deflation in Scotland about any kind of talks of going independence or anything like that, because of how Labour secured so many seats and how set back it was for the SNP for them. Is there?
I don't feel like the recent GE was a setback for the SNP at all.
You don't think it was at all? Do you feel like after 10 years now, because it has been 10 years since then, do you feel there hasn't been? Let's see. I'm trying to find the right words here. Do you feel there's still a lot of people who still believe in independence and still want independence?
You're asking if there's still an appetite for...
Yeah, I think that's a fair question, because it has been 10 years since then. I mean, I'm not going to go with this premise of the whole once in a generation bollocks thing. Like, do people like after that vote, and it has been 10 years since then, and obviously lots has happened since then.
Yeah.
You know, holding on to that can be quite challenging for some and for others. What's your feeling when you talk to people about it? Where if it gets brought up again, you know?
Well, okay. So really, the only two parties that Scots have the option of, out with the Tories, who we're not voting for,
Yeah.
who are not Labour, who have shown their true colours and aren't going to be voted for.
Yep.
The Lib Dems, who are so wishy-washy that they're not going to get voted for.
No.
The only real options in Scotland are the Greens, the SNP, and Alba.
Yeah.
Now, the Greens certainly have like a decent share of the vote up here. They tend to be people's number two, like when you get to vote for two parties, you know, in our elections.
Yeah.
So folk will tend to vote SNP first because there's a goal in mind, and the Greens second, just because as a party they're pretty progressive and they're not afraid to be progressive and try and go for things that other parties aren't even talking about.
Yeah.
But I can't understand why anyone would vote for Alba. And I'll tell you why. Because at the referendum 10 years ago, Alex Salmond, he led that
Yes.
drive for a referendum. And he was given the go-ahead by Westminster because, again, the Scottish Parliament is a fucking branch office, and I'm not going to apologise for swearing because not enough
you
of
can
you
swear
are
all you want on
accepting
here.
this, right?
We're not monetized, so you could swear to all your heart's content.
Holyrood is a branch office, nothing more than that. We have zero power to go ahead and do anything for ourselves. Everything the Scottish Parliament does that's not devolved has to be sanctioned by Westminster. If we want to hold a referendum, yes, it does have to be sanctioned by Westminster. We do not have the ability to just go ahead and do that and have it accepted, regardless of how that vote turns out. I need that known, right? So Alex Salmond gets this golden apple, this ability to hold a referendum on leaving the Union.
Yeah.
And he sets the date. He's like, we're going to have it in 2014, okay?
Right.
In 2013, not just the end of 2013, in January of 2013, Nicola Sturgeon is holding TV debates with other MPs, other leaders, and it's on independence. It's the question of, should Scotland leave the Union? Yous are like planning on having this referendum, you know, like what's it like, blah, blah, and they're getting into the nitty gritty of it.
Yeah.
She was saying in January of 2013, so almost 2 years before we actually had the vote, when the other side, the no side, are coming at her saying, oh, you know that if Scotland leaves the British Union, then they'll automatically be out of the EU, and won't that be terrible? And it would be terrible. People in Scotland want to be in the EU. They see its benefits. But her response from, again, January of 2013 was, you guys are planning on having an in-out referendum on the EU. What are you talking about? If we vote no at this next referendum on Scotland's place in the British Union, yous are going to be holding a referendum on whether we get to stay in the EU or not. So there's every likelihood that if Scotland votes no, it's going to end up being pulled out of the European Union. Right? She knew that. The Scottish government knew that. And yet Alex Salmond, having this right to hold a referendum on the subject, decided to have it before the referendum for whether we got to stay in or out of the EU. What do we think the vote would have been had we waited until after 2016 to hold that referendum? When Scots had voted to stay in the EU, been dragged out despite that, what would have happened had we had the independence referendum after the Brexit referendum. What would have happened if he'd held off for a couple of years? We wouldn't be sitting here talking about it being 10 years since the referendum that failed in Scotland. The likelihood is we would be out of the British Union because they fecked us by taking us out of the European Union against our will. But he jumped the gun. And now he has adherents that are prepared to say that, oh, the SNP aren't doing anything. They're not getting us independence. Screw the SNP. They're useless. No, you squandered that right. Alex Salmond, the guy that leads you, squandered that right.
So he had the date to choose whenever.
Yeah, there was nothing suggesting he had to have it in 2014.
So he could have held on it. That's
especially since they knew there was an upcoming Brexit referendum.
Yeah.
Because again, they knew that in January of 2013. Our vote wasn't held until September of 2014. We knew that the in-out vote on the European Union was coming.
Yeah.
But they decided to preempt that. Like, he was that confident. But then it also allowed the lies from the no side, the fact that we were going to be out of the EU automatically on leaving the British Union, that there was no way we were going to be accepted back into the European Union, that everyone, all the countries would stand in the way of Scotland joining as an independent country. No, they're not. They've all come out since saying, no, we would absolutely let Scotland take the British place that's been left in the European Union. Of course they would. We're an oil producing and exporting country. Every union in the world wants OPEC countries as part of their group. It's a given. Do you know what I mean? Even just the fact that we've done so well with renewables, people want like countries that are great energy providers as part of their blocks. But he went and jumped the gun, and now we have Alba going, oh, the SNP aren't doing enough. They don't have the right to fucking do anything. They're stymied. And they're stymied to the point where, like, they've got everyone going, oh, but you don't really want that another referendum. You did that. Do you remember you did that a decade ago and you decided then? So you're not really going to want to do that again. It's like there have been material changes since, in that we're no longer in the European Union and we no longer have the ease of trade and travel and all of the benefits, the sheer amount of funding that was obtained from the EU as a member. We have none of that now.
Yeah.
But had we waited until the Brexit referendum was over and done, had we waited until we're out of the EU, had we then had the referendum and seceded from the British Union, we would already be back in the European Union, like as an independent Scotland. We would already be making things work.
Yeah.
You know, we'd have borders set up, we'd have checkpoints set up, we'd finally be able to do for ourselves. We wouldn't have our last oil refinery taken from us, so that the only ones left are in England. It makes me a little annoyed to get into it, because it was such a wasted chance. It was such a waste of an opportunity by someone who was just super overconfident in his own ability to get everyone on side. Like, I never joined the SNP until Salmond left. I hated Salmond. Before I even started looking into Scottish history, I could not stand that man. And it was only after Nicola Sturgeon came in that I was like, do you know what? I'm now on side with Scotland. I'm now on side with the SNP's goal. And I feel like with this leader in charge, someone that I can actually respect, like, I'm happy to be a member now, you know? I think he was purely detrimental to the SNP, detrimental to Scotland. So the idea that these Alba folk are coming out railing against the SNP, when the SNP, again, are in a branch office, they have no right to hold a referendum. They have no right to do anything that Westminster doesn't want them to do. Not just that, the powers that they do have, the rights over, the devolved powers, can be taken from us on a whim by Westminster. And they
So,
keep threatening that all the time. They keep threatening us with taking away our powers.
so
And
I suppose a question that I suppose somebody on the outside who doesn't know about the history, someone may ask, well, why doesn't Scotland go to the international courts or make a case in the international courts, possibly? Like that would be so. Why would there be any case whatsoever, any kind of legal case that Scotland could have? Yeah, if of the position of let's say the polls were saying like more than 60% of Scottish people were saying they want to vote yes, and everybody's been voting SNP, and you're still not getting the independence vote. Could the Scottish government go to the international courts and have a case against Westminster for that vote if Westminster was refusing it, or would they not be able to based on would there would be legal wranglings, I would assume, as well, in order to do that as well, as far as your knowledge?
yeah, I mean, if you're taking anything to court, it's going to have legal wranglings. That's
Yeah,
court
but
for
this one's
based
quite
on
big, though, to be fair, isn't it?
legalities. But I think there's an easier way to go about it, but I'll get into that in a minute. The taking it to the main European courts or the
Yeah,
international courts would probably have to be done on the basis that Westminster is effectively denying Scotland democracy.
yeah.
They're denying us the ability to even have a poll of our population, which is what a referendum is.
You'd have to prove it in
Like,
evidence, basically,
yeah,
to say,
because
yeah.
I mean, the Brexit referendum wasn't supposed to be binding. Referendums are just a way to feel out the population. It's not the results of referendums often don't translate into action. But for some reason, the Brexit referendum was taken as de facto, yes, everyone wants to leave, so we're just doing that. Despite the fact that a lot of people that voted were uninformed, which you can see from the next day's Google searches. What is the European Union? What has the European Union ever done for Britain, etc.? The stuff people should have been Googling in the lead up to voting, you know. So I think if you approach international courts on the basis that you feel like Westminster's denying your country democracy, I certainly think that that's a viable in there. My thoughts regarding that, though, was to skip the courts and to kind of even skip the Scottish Parliament. I had a thought. It was something that I'm still possibly going to do. So what I want to do is, you've got Salvo, which is a group up here that believe that independence can be gained if we're able to refer back to the claim of right. Which, okay, maybe. I feel like we've kind of progressed beyond that we can come up with better arguments now. So I'm not super on side with Salvo, but if I was to do something similar to what Salvo are trying to do, my idea was to take the Declaration of Independence from 1306, the 1306, 1307, you know, Bruce and his adherents literally sending a letter to the Pope saying England has no right over us for these reasons. We have our own history. We are our own people, our own country, and we're Christian. So no Christian nation has the right to come in. And this was during the Crusades, where the Pope was literally telling countries and rulers of countries that they could go into any non-Christian country with the Pope's sanction, with the sanction of the Vatican, to then take them over, conquer them, make them Christian, you know? So Edward was coming into Scotland on that idea. He told the Pope, I'm going into Scotland because, you know, screw those guys, I'm going to make them Christian. And Robert Bruce is like, are you joking me? We're already Christian and you guys have no right over us. You know? So that was an assertion of Scottish rights and Scottish independence. And that was such an an important document in history that it formed the basis of the American Declaration of Independence. So I want to take that. I want to use the same format, but more up to date. But I also want to lean on something else from our history.
Yeah.
So there was something at the end of the 19th century called the Monster Petition. Now, this wasn't counted in how many signatures it got. It was counted in how many miles long it was. And it was signed by Scots from all parts of life, all walks of life. And the point of this petition was the Britain, not England debate. So what we were finding from even Scottish politicians, Scottish publishers, etc., was that in a lot of documentation, Britain or British would actually be termed England or English, as if they meant the same thing.
Yeah.
And Scots really rose up against this. They're like, we are not England. Do you know what I mean? And you would have Scottish commanders, like military commanders and officers, literally trying to boost their men's spirits by giving speeches prior to battles, literally telling them, Scotsmen, that we need to get in there and do this for England. Come on. And the Scots are like, okay, we're kind of doing it for Britain because we're in the British Army, but sure, you know, like whatever you say. And so I want to take those two aspects.
Yeah.
So I want to have a Declaration of Independence, but more contemporary, up to date.
Yeah.
I also want to make this a petition. So I want to get as many signatures as possible, worldwide signatures as possible. Then I want to form it in a way where it's delivered to parliaments and governments throughout the world as I want to frame it in a way that's going to be specific to whatever country it goes to. So say we give it to like the French premier, we would maybe attach to that a cover letter harking back to the old alliance and the old ties that Scotland used to have to France, you know? So we would personalize it for each government just to better get them on side. Now, the idea behind this is that anytime Westminster wants to do a trade deal or wants to get other countries to sign on to whatever treaties, that those countries stop and go, we'll sign off on this, provided you give Scotland democracy. We'll agree to this as long as you allow Scotland to poll its own population. That, do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like getting the international community on board is so important. And what Nicola Sturgeon's government started by creating Scottish hubs in countries all over the place was super important, because those hubs can become Scottish embassies should we be able to leave the Union and rejoin the EU, etc. That would give us an in those countries already. So the SNP are already laying the groundwork in as much as they're allowed to. Because I'll repeat it again, it's not allowed to do anything Westminster doesn't let it.
Yeah.
So
but you're trying to
getting
build
the
up
international communities on board is definitely important.
Is it fair to say so obviously trying to build, obviously, so I guess I don't really know whether or not about the possibility of taking it to an international court, European court, but to try and, I mean, the relationships between Scotland and other countries is there, but to try to get them on the side of trying to bring up the history between Scotland and those nations before England, before Britain, to help try and use that leverage in such a way to help get them behind them, of like, look at some other countries, some of their histories, and some of them who have broken away and become their own independence countries, for example, as well, to try and use as an example. I'm sure there's be plenty of examples people will put in the comments, but other nations that have broken away from their freedoms, I suppose. I mean, hell, Ukraine is a prime example. It didn't even exist, I suppose.
Yes.
You know, like to say, like we want the same. We want to have that freedom too. So you guys can you guys? I'm sure you guys can understand why you guys we will want your support for it. It's just a hypothetical, obviously, but
yeah,
but
I feel like we have to frame it as Westminster allowing us democracy,
right,
because I can't think of very many countries that are super against being denied democracy to any extent.
yeah,
That's like a basic freedom of living in our contemporary world, is the ability to vote on whatever we want. The fact that the franchise includes women, and in Scotland a lot of times it includes like people from the age of 16 upwards rather than 18 upwards, rather than 21 upwards like in some countries.
yeah,
That we have such an expansion of the franchise these days, and that we're not allowed to use that franchise. We're not allowed to have a vote on something that so many people find to be so important.
yeah,
And it's not just important to them personally, it's important to everyone up here. It's important to Scottish way of life. It's important to just being able to do for ourselves and for progression. That Westminster stymie progression at every opportunity. Again, the fact that we can be seen to be as progressive as we are is despite everything that Westminster puts up to try and stop that. And it's a lot. Like they really, I mean, you can see that in the way that they got in the way of a few votes recently. They overturned decisions taken by the Scottish
yes,
Parliament recently.
them, yeah,
I feel like that was them really just showing their weight. They were showing that they can, that it doesn't matter that we've allowed you some freedoms.
yeah,
We can take those away from you whenever we want to. You have no say in it. There's nothing you can do to stop that from happening, except there is, and that's voting to leave the union. That's the only way that we can get rid of the roadblocks, that we can get rid of this threat from down south that constantly looms over any decision we attempt to make for ourselves. The idea that it has to be accepted down south as well as in Holyrood is just ridiculous. I mean, things are devolved for a reason, and they shouldn't be able to get in the way of devolved policies and discussions and votes. You
yeah,
know, but they do, and I think that's them just showing that how they can pull their weight against us.
yeah, yeah. It's I can feel I can feel obviously in this conversation so much anger and frustration from you, because you feel like this has been such an ongoing battle.
We have nothing against the English.
Oh no,
Nothing. We feel
I
sorry for you more than anything, because
oh
you guys are
no,
stuck
I know
between a rock
exactly.
and a hard place. You've got
I
the
know
Tories or you've got Labour.
yeah. No. I don't ever incentivize in any way that it's against people. It's always governments. It's always governments.
Yeah.
But people always have the premise, well, you guys voted governments in. Yeah, but not everyone is always well informed, or people are misinformed or ill informed as well. And I think that's I think that's important context as well. I mean, like
There's also the kind of gullibility aspect of people falling for mainstream propaganda.
yes.
I mean,
BBC Scotland for a
it
prime
was
example.
already known, it was already common knowledge in Scotland that a Scottish vote means absolutely nothing when it comes to a general election for Westminster. That was already known. Yet the propaganda that came out so strongly about shifting like unseating the Tories, that literally made people doubt what they already knew about their votes meaning absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And they voted for Labour thinking that they were helping, and they were helping nobody, least of all themselves, you know.
Yeah. I guess I just a question. Obviously, I generally would like to. What is your what is your general consensus of how other nations feel about Scotland and the UK as a whole in general? Because obviously, since then, and obviously there's been lots of debates about the union in itself, about whether or not, like, what is going to happen to it, because obviously there is obviously Plaid Cymru, for example. Obviously in Wales, obviously they want Welsh independence, but they're not shouting too much about it, understandably. But I do think that is something that perhaps maybe in 10-20 years, I don't know if they can have a real conversation about it. And obviously it's going to happen at some point. Northern Ireland will finally be broken from this union. They are just more ignored more ignored than anyone, I think it's fair to say, in this.
Yeah.
What's from, obviously, from, not from me, but from people that you hear from England and Wales and Scotland, England, Wales, sorry, Northern Ireland, do you feel that the United Kingdom is broken? Not, but more, but is it even more broken because of what happened with Brexit? And do you feel that it's not just a case of the history of distrust between England and Scotland, but you feel that England has always broken its trust with the UK as a whole, and it's just a matter of time, do you feel, before the United Kingdom, the union itself, breaks up? I'm not really put that question pretty well.
I feel like Westminster have pretty much always seen the population of this island as fodder.
Yeah.
I think Westminster only view us minions as people that can be convinced into voting them in and giving them a seat of power for X amount of time. I don't think they see the population as a useful resource outside of their own goals and their own expectations.
Yeah.
I think they see the population as a means to an end for them. I don't think they actually care at all. And I think that's why we've seen so many policies that make people who formerly weren't disadvantaged now struggle. That we've seen policies that have absolutely drained people's savings within the last decade.
Yeah.
That we've seen the Tories just spaff billions up the wall because they see the Westminster coffers as their money. It's not the people's money. It's their money. The moment it goes into that exchequer, they can do what they want with it. Who's going to tell them no? No one was able to stop the Tories. And you know who learned a lesson from that? Labour have learned a lesson from the last 14 years of Tories. They've learned exactly what they can and can't get away with. And there's not very much they can't get away with. It's not great. And Brexit has only exacerbated that. I mean, people looking to escape just for a blissful couple of weeks in the sun away from Britain and politics and the hassle of being here and the expenses like that come with just being a citizen of Britain. They have their own issues because suddenly customs is a thing.
Yeah.
And they can't even just escape to Benidorm or wherever they usually like holiday because we're no longer in the EU. We have no freedom of travel. So even getting away is now a hassle. I feel like everyone is pissed off.
Yeah.
Knows how, and you can see that just from how quickly the tide turned after Labour were voted in there. There's not very many people that are stoked with how they're progressing and what they're doing and the lack of change that's come out of them coming into Parliament. So it's definitely split, but also what you're finding is that there are lots of people in Northern Ireland. There are lots of people in England and Wales that are quite happy for Scotland to go its own way if it wants. They're no longer clinging to this, we are one country, one nation in this together.
Yeah.
That propaganda of the world wars, it lasted for a really long time. But I think we're seeing the final end to that propaganda. I think we're seeing the final dissolution of that idea. That there are so many people that are just like, listen, if Wales want to leave, do it. Like, absolutely. Like, see how it goes. Good luck to you. And the same applies to Scotland. The same applies to reunification of Ireland.
Yes.
That a lot of people are on board with that, and we're seeing in a lot of cases when the Scottish question is brought up, you're seeing a lot of MPs coming out and going, oh, well, I mean, if they're going to have the vote to leave the Union, then shouldn't the Union get to vote as well? Shouldn't the English and the Welsh and the folk in Northern Ireland get to vote as well on this issue, since it affects us all if you leave?
That straight away hits me, and I'm just
Yeah.
like, why should? But that's the thing. Like, I'm an Englishman, and I'm like, why should I decide whether Scotland should stay and leave the European Union? That's
Here,
not.
I'm into it. I'm into it. Do you know what? Give the entire island the vote. If that's what it's going to take to get us another go at deciding our future, I can give the island a vote. Give everybody the vote. Who cares? You've got a swelling amount, a swelling percentage of people that are just on side with the union ending, and they're on side with Scots at least being given the option to make a choice in the matter, no matter which way it goes. Got a lot of Englishmen like yourself who's just like, listen, if you want to have it, do it. You know, we can see what happens. If you're at leave, then good luck to yous, you know. But you also have those English nationalists who are
Yes.
buying the same lies as Scottish unionists have been buying, that Scotland is too wee and too poor and would be really sad without being in the union, that everything would just go to shit if we were to leave the union. And those people who don't like Scotland anyway, they believe that we're being funded by England. They believe that Westminster is subsidizing Scotland, which is the lie that Westminster used to keep Scots on board.
Yeah.
It's like, if you leave, you're not going to be able to do for yourself. You're not going to have the finances to be able to do anything. It's going to go really badly for you. And I know this because it's what I grew up believing. It's what I grew up being told. We were going to become this third world nation if we were to leave the Union. That's a prevailing sentiment amongst Scottish Unionists. But that lie is also being heard by the English nationalists. And their only question is, why the fuck are my taxes going to subsidise Scotland? Get rid of them. We don't need them. We'd be able to fund more stuff in England if we weren't subsidising Scotland. So if you give the island the vote on whether Scotland should stay or leave, I think we would get overwhelming numbers telling us to leave just from England alone. And that's all we would need. Because you've got those that are on side with Scotland, that are friends with us and just want to see us being able to do what we want to do for ourselves. And you've got those that have bought the lie that they subsidise us and their tax money's coming up here to pay for our free prescriptions and education, which they're not getting down south. I say give the island the vote. Do you know what I mean? I'm into it.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see what the outcome would be, to be honest.
I would be too. I wonder. I don't know if there's been any polls on it, but it would certainly be. It would certainly be.
It'd be interesting.
It would be interesting if
And Westminster couldn't not be on side with that, because it wouldn't be giving the Scots something. It'd be giving everybody the thing, and that would be the right to vote on the issue. Right.
Yes, it would be. It would be.
And it's what English MPs are calling. Every time the question comes up, you hear it from so many English MPs. They shouldn't get to decide that if we don't get a vote in the matter, if we don't get a say in the matter. It's our union too. We should get to vote whether they want to stay or leave. Okay, do that then. See how it goes. I'm into it.
while we've been talking, I just want to say, Alistair Keir, thank you so much for the 20 gifted memberships. That's extremely kind of you, and for the £2 super chat
He is
earlier.
one of the best of people, is our Alistair.
He is an extremely kind person, as is everyone here in the chat with your comments. So I just want to say also, for those who are here, guys, if you haven't already hit the like button, please hit the like button, and do share
And
this across
subscribe.
and subscribe, and don't forget
And
to
join the
share.
Patreon and become members. Do all the things.
you let me do my plug-in here.
You know you want to.
Down in the links below, guys. If you actually, if not just myself, but obviously down in the links below, guys. If you want to support Random Scottish History and the wonderful work that she does,
you want, but this is the man you want to be supporting. Like,
yeah, but we want to support you too.
I'm just here for a chat.
We want to support you too. Links are down below. Links below, guys and girls, because there may be one or two girls in the chat. I don't know. We can't assume that everyone is a male in the chat. But yeah, the links are links are down below, guys. So do check them out. If you're not subscribed to both our channels, why are you not? Come on, it doesn't cost anything to subscribe as well. It really does make a massive difference. So thank you guys so much for it. And guys, if you have any questions, throw them at us. I'll bring them up for us. So if you have any questions, feel free to do so as well there. So while we wait for some questions, good God Almighty, did you honestly think that Keir Starmer would turn from someone that actually was going to be going from really popular to be completely negative, and now he's just no different to the Conservatives, given that he's taking all these gifts in? It's like I haven't really talked about this, but all these gifting and donations, and especially the talk of it. I mean, like I totally understand people on who support Labour would say that, well, what the Conservatives did was worse, and absolutely, everyone's right to say that what the Conservatives did over the last 14 years was worse, absolutely, and the donations and everything they took in was worse. But it is a hypocrisy to try and justify to say that Keir Starmer accepting these gifts and donations, that yes, they are legal, and yes, they are declaring them and all that, but is there not a conflict of interest in it? And there is a conflict of interest in this. Because how can you not say that there isn't some kind of conflict of interest in this? And that's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah. I mean, if there are like any organizations paying you, and these organizations are slightly dubious, like maybe frackers or something, and they're paying you for something, and it's not to stop them from doing what they're doing. They're
I mean, if I got free tickets to a wrestling show, they would expect some. If I got free tickets to a wrestling show, and trust me, as a big wrestling fan, I'd be very delighted to get free tickets. But I'm sure they would want something in return for them as well.
Yeah. A lot of those donations are with a view on the return, and it's often a return that far exceeds the initial outlay. I mean, you see that from the Tories and all the contracts they gave out throughout COVID, you know.
I just want to say thank you.
These people managed to pay like 10,000 to get an MP on side, and then suddenly they're getting millions in return. You know, that's money well spent.
Did you watch I don't know if you had time, but have you seen the video from Sky News on the Westminster accounts on Labour, the one that Sam Coates did?
No, I don't think so.
Basically broke down the amount of money. So basically, apparently, Keir Starmer's had about, I think it's someone could correct me if I'm wrong in chat, but like about £35,000 worth for football matches and that from the Premier League, basically. And it's because and the story is obviously they were going to be imposing new regulations on the Premier League. The Labour government is going to be.
We're going to, prior to free tickets for the Premier League.
They haven't said that yet. They haven't said they're not going to. They haven't said they're not going to. But obviously, all this
will not try very hard to, though.
Yeah. But I just want to put that in there. Alistair Keir just wanted to say, Governor's report on English think of Scotland have not released even after court cases said they had. Thank you again for the £5 super chat. I very much appreciated it. Much appreciated. And Dave McGuinness, good to see you there lurking in the chat. The last poll in England leaving the Union was 49% before, so they've stopped polling on the subject.
Yeah,
Oh,
see,
okay.
even England wants to leave the Union because they believe that the money's getting split unequally between England and Scotland. They think Scotland's getting too many benefits from the Union, like, so they want to go alone. They want their money to be spent on themselves, not realizing that a lot of the money spent down south comes from our royal reserves and our whiskey sales and a lot of revenue that's Scottish originated. Like,
Yeah,
they're not aware of that.
Lee Corn, good to see you, buddy. Hope you're doing well. The Premier League has given the most value in gifts. There's an upcoming debate about the future of English football. Yeah, that's where they're trying to throw money at the Prime Minister. I don't know if someone. I haven't looked at the actual accounts, but I wouldn't be surprised if David Lammy accepted gifts. I know West Streeting got given Taylor Swift tickets apparently as well. So I'm just like.
At what point do we find out how many Oasis tickets go to MPs?
Oh yes, about that as well.
They were going for a wee bit, eh?
I just want like, honestly, I don't care what political, like, on this particular issue about these gifts and donations. Like, I honestly don't care what political party you are. Like, just cut this off. Like, just politicians could get far more done and far more say if they just simply. If they could just have this rule where they can't accept, they could only accept a certain amount.
They are effectively bribes.
They are bribes because they're not, and they're legal.
I'm legal.
It's legal conflicts of interest. These are, they're legal, and it's so infuriating. And I'm sure that, I'm sure there are some MPs in that house who aren't those who are taking these in, who aren't taking those gifts and donations, and must be tearing their fucking hairs out, like because they're trying to help people out, and then there's these rich fuckers who keep coming in, and businesses and influencers coming in, throwing money to get things going their way and maintain the status quo, as they say.
I think you're right in that some MPs start out that way. But once they're fully immersed in the culture of Westminster, this is what the culture of Westminster has always traditionally done to the representatives. When Scots joined the Union, a lot of this is back in the days where you had to own X amount price of land just to be able to vote, and a lot of the lords that were voted in as MPs that ended up, we got 16 in the House of Lords. They all moved down to London to be closer to their cohorts and their new workplace, you know. So Scots were always really frugal. Like, so when we joined the Union, we had no public debt to speak of, whereas England had £20 million worth of debt at the time of the Union, which now equates to like 3-point-something billion worth of debt at the time of the Union. This is £20 million in 1707 money, right?
Yeah.
It was a shitload of debt that England had. And when we joined, we took on half that debt as part of the Union. And these English lords that were now the friends and work colleagues of the Scots who had gone down to live and work down there in Parliament changed these people. So these people have been brought up being really savvy with their funds, and you can see that emulated in the Scottish Parliament of today, that they've had to work within a budget for a couple of centuries, you know, like we've always had to. Well, I mean, the Scottish Parliament's only been reignited since, like, what was it, the 90s? But they've had to work within a budget, and the amount they've been able to achieve despite that is incredible. but not so much down at Westminster. Down at Westminster, the squandering of money is what they're best at. They don't care. Again, they don't see it as public funds. That's Westminster's money to spend how they want. And these lords that went down were corrupted by that to the point that the clearances happened. They felt like they could make more money with sheep than people. So people were just cleared off their lands to make way for cattle and sheep grazing, because England was already finding it quite difficult to feed its population. It didn't have the resources to be able to feed its booming population.
Yeah.
So the Scots were like, oh, well, we can make money with that. We can supply you with meat. Let us just shift a few of these peasants first. Do you know what I mean? So Westminster's always been a corrupting influence. So these MPs that come into Parliament now, they will stand and they will campaign on the best of intentions, and they may very well believe what they're saying. See, once they're down there and they're actually in their seats, it becomes following the party line.
Yeah.
And the party line doesn't tend to be for the benefit of the people. It tends to be for the benefit of the donors, of those contributing football tickets, fancy weekends away, dinners, money, whatever. Illicit things in a lot of cases when it comes to the Tories. But there's a lot of corruption and a lot of corrupting influences down at Westminster, and there always has been. That's always been the case. And England needs its own devolved parliament, and it needs to root out the corruption in its own parliament. Like, England should absolutely leave the union as well. The union should be split up so that we can all focus on what our people and our countries need and what's best for it. Because I think Westminster's too tied up with trying to do everything. It's trying to be an imperial parliament and speaking for the whole country, as in its, for Scotland and
trying
England,
to speak for the
Wales
whole
and
union
Northern,
instead of actually,
when it would just be far more beneficial to focus on England, focus on the English people. The fact that life is getting so much harder for so many down south, the education is a hard fought thing down south, that you need the time and resources just to be able to get further education. You don't just get to I mean, I'm coming at this from the point of view of literally doing an open university degree while on a night shift at work. That cost me nothing. The SAAS paid for my education. None of it cost me anything. But a lot of the groups that were created around the subjects that I was doing were full of mainly English people who are also doing the same course, but their conversations were centered around the cost benefit weighing up of the course. Is what we're paying like too much for what we're getting out of the course? And I couldn't join those conversations because it was free for me to do in my spare time. Like, it's so easy to pick up further education up here compared to down south. Where if you're a single mom with wains, like, and you don't have the finances barely to make it from week to week, there's no way that you're going to be able to have any contribution to be able to get education for yourself. How are you going to pay for college? How are you going to even pay for like an open university course that you can do in whatever spare time you happen to have? And what I find is, in countries where they make education cost really anything, you find there's quite a strong right-wing influence in these countries. And I feel that's because you've got less people going into further education in order to be able to then critically think about a thing. They're going to believe the whole, oh, immigrants are taking my jobs, they're taking the houses, they're getting paid by like our tax money and welfare. They're going to buy all the bullshit far easier than someone that went to college or university, because they can critically think about a thing. And they're also going to have come into contact. There's going to be students that they're studying along with that are immigrants, that are contributing to society, they're not going to have the same mindset of someone that's never been introduced to an immigrant who's contributing and isn't causing any problems. They're just going to come out and go, no, that's bad. White people only, you know, like
yeah,
we don't
but
want
that's also, that's not just obvious. It's I would say
you
it's
see it in
obviously
America. I
yeah,
mean,
but it's not. It's
Trump,
lowering
Trump
education.
himself is a prime example of what happens if you don't make education freely accessible to a population. Trump happens. Boris Johnson happens.
Hmm.
You know, no one with a brain in their head is going to vote for these people.
Well, I'd just say this: that
Sorry to all you Trump voters and Boris Johnson. I'm not sorry.
no, you're totally cool. I would say, obviously, before we get to Jal's question there. And by the way, guys, do ping me in the chat if you do have a direct question you want to ask us. I do say, obviously, that education, you know, those three terms, like Tony Blair used to say, education. No, it's not just a phrase. It actually does matter. Education really does matter.
Hugely.
It matters from the moment that a child is born into this world. It matters from the very first steps.
I believe that alone is more responsible than anything as to why Scotland's more progressive or seem to be more progressive than England.
I would agree with that, because on the premise that you're trying to protect your education system, because that's obviously is the bedrock for any foundation for any nation whatsoever, regardless of where you are in the world. And if you don't have a great education system, you have a less educated society, which means that they are more susceptible to misinformation, propaganda.
And what does that turn the population into? It turns them into the fodder that Westminster sees them as.
Yes, which is why education is so much needed as well. But I also believe that media reform is something that I kick and scream about all the time as well. I think that is something that we so badly need. Not just.
It's one of the good things about social media is there's so many grassroots avenues to obtain information from that doesn't rely on going to the BBC or Fox or whoever you get your people used to historically get their information from and trust. Like
and people have just learned to move. People have learned, like, they can use that, but people have learned, like, to go online instead. But the problem is that while it has benefited some people, and obviously it has benefited me, because I probably would have been on the other side of the spectrum if it wasn't for social media and certain YouTube algorithms driving me to certain content creators. But it could also have the opposite effect as well. So it's social media and the internet and the information on it is a two-way system. It's both a benefit and a curse, but it depends on the level of the person's education as well. I think that plays a factor into it too. I'm just going to go to Jal's question here. I'm pretty sure we can come back. I'm pretty sure we've answered this question kind of already, but how do you folks see the rise of corruption in the UK that is so apparent that even in the outside of the country that it appears in the news? They talk on the mainstream news like it's almost like it's normalized is the word I think it is. And it's infuriating. It's just like, no, you shouldn't be talking like that it's okay. No, it's not fucking okay. What's going on? Like,
well, you were talking earlier about how the international community sees us and sees the union and the separate countries of the union.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is look at their political cartoons to see what they think of Westminster.
Russia, for fuck's sake. Like, how much influence Russia has gone in? Like, the whole the Russian report. Like, why has Labour not chased up on this, for fuck's sake, when they came in?
Why do you think? They're accepting money from the same sources as the Tories did. Do you think that Labour don't get funded by Russia?
Well, I will say this, right? We know that the Tories are influenced by Russia. Allegedly, I'm just going to put that out there because we hear plenty of stories. But I've not seen a piece, and people are more than welcome to give me point me in the right directions of direct influence from Russia on the Labour Party itself. I've not seen that, so that's why I've not That's why I've not stated it anywhere. If I've seen it somewhere, then maybe I'll state it. But I've not seen anything that says that there has
Hedging your
been linked.
bets a little bit.
If people want to provide me in that direction, more than welcome to. But yeah, how do we see the rise of corruption in the UK?
Okay. Well, the EU question kind of gives you the insight you need more than anything. So, on the run up to the Brexit referendum, a lot of financial news and big news organizations, CNN and all MSNBC and even the BBC were running segments about how Britain's Brexit vote was an outlier within the EU. So a lot of European countries have parties set up with a particular view and a particular goal of leaving the European Union. But what you find unanimously amongst those parties in other countries in the European in Europe is that they have ties with Russia to some extent. That it's Russia that they're and Russian policy that they're really being driven by in their bid to leave the European Union, that there's a basis there that lies with Russia. And a lot of the news articles that were coming out in segments that were coming out prior to the Brexit vote was, it's so strange that England and Britain are planning on having this referendum on leaving the EU. And it seems to be without any ties to Russia. It appears that this isn't born out of any ties to Russian policy aiming for the same thing, for the dissolution of the European Union. And they were all very confused about this. And then it came out that, oh no, Russia was involved, and Russia totally, definitely inserted their big toe and made it happen, and were part of the whole propaganda about leaving the EU, that Britain was in no way an outlier compared to these other countries, that there was a faction in Farage that was funded in part by Russia with a view to taking Britain out of the EU. And Russia saw the results of the Brexit referendum as a huge win, because they're like, topple one domino and the rest will follow. You'll start seeing it in countries throughout the European Union. What they didn't expect was that Britain would end up being the poster child for what happens if you leave the European Union and all the shit you're going to have to deal with thereafter, all the ways in which your life as you formerly knew it is now being curtailed. They didn't realize that Britain would act as a warning to other countries, that if they left the European Union, they would face exactly the same hardships, the same difficulties, the same hurdles. They would no longer have the freedom of movement, of trade, blah, blah. And life would be impacted in a variety of ways if they left the European Union.
Yeah.
So if Labour, and bear in mind that all these people in the know in media saw Britain as the outlier because there was no Russian interference. But now we know that actually it's not an outlier. It is firmly in bed with Russia in that regard. Now, you would assume then, if it's 100% Russia driven, that Labour, if they weren't driven at all by Russia, weren't funded at all by Russia, would make whatever steps were necessary to rejoin the EU. That they wouldn't just sit back and go, oh, well, it's happened now. We just have to see how it goes. That they would actually come out against what we all know to be fact now. And they're not doing that. They're furthering Brexit, and they're firmly on board with Brexit, and they won't hear anything said against Brexit. Why is that? When 100% of pro-anti-EU sentiment has a basis with Russia, why would Labour not go against that trend? Yeah. Could it be because there is some funding by Russia?
Maybe there may be
ties there.
There's definitely there is definitely some corruption
Because
in
if they were
Labour.
if they weren't to come out against Brexit,
Mm,
if they were to come out in favor of the EU, that would make them then the outlier, wouldn't it?
yeah,
And they're not doing that. They're
yeah.
joining in with the 100% of other ones that have a basis in Russian funding
Mm,
and Russian interference,
yeah.
which
Oh,
tells us a thing.
yeah. There's so quite had quite a few people in the super chat. First of all, Alistair Keir gifting 2 more super chats. He's on a roll today. He's on a gifting roll today. He says, Regan
We
and
love him so
Jenny,
much.
can we do this? Can we do this again? I love this. I'm sure we will do this again. We could definitely do this again in the future. Absolutely, we definitely will. And he also gifted as well another £5 super chat saying, MPs need to have sponsorship donors on their clothes like F1 drivers. Just an idea. Yeah, they should. They should have a massive
Yep.
badge saying this suit
If
was
it's to be allowed, it should be transparent.
This suit, or have it on their back. This suit was gifted
Yeah.
by this person, this person, this person.
They don't even have to be that blatant about
I've been
it.
paid for by this donor.
Yeah, when they're campaigning, it should be on their campaign literature, funded by. Like any literature you get through the door, this ad was paid for by. This propaganda is paid for by.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. E.
This
for the
guy's
2
campaign
by
is
the way.
paid for by.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if they're going to allow the bribery, it has to be transparent bribery.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's no justification for it. It is just
Yeah.
wrong because it is
It
just
is.
bribery at the end of the day. Like,
Yep. Sorry, there are ties to Russia, Londongrad. Yeah, I know we call it. Yeah, whenever I talk about Russia or whatever, I automatically start saying Londongrad. And Boris. Yeah, Boris is the obvious one, obviously. Farage and many others. There are definitely links from Farage as well. I mean, the rhetoric, like the way he talks about Russia and Putin and war, and he always straight away comes up with the, the war in Ukraine. He always tries to say, "Oh, it's NATO's fault. That's what's happened."
yeah,
but NATO didn't invade Ukraine. Russia did. NATO didn't annex Crimea in 2014. Russia did.
yeah. The apologists need to be lumped in with the adherents, because to be an apologist is to be an adherent, no matter how you frame it. Like, you're on sides.
Yeah, it's for sure.
Don't die on us yet.
No, I promise I won't. I promise I won't. Stephen Moore, good morning over in New Zealand. Trust in the market, pay rises are inflationary. Capitalism is the best of all systems. Immigration is a negative. All these things are drilled into people. They are.
Is that sarcastic?
No. As in that they are drilled into them against their will. That is like that's again. It's all being hammered into their minds, even though it's wrong. They don't have the free will, shall we say? I mean, what I don't even know what free will is. To be fair, if someone was to ask me what is free will, what is free will? Do we even have free will? Then I start asking myself about the Matrix, and if
we don't even have the freedom to poll our people on what they think of a thing. No.
Do you not? Can you not do it? Can you not? Can you not? Is that? Am I being silly with that question?
Yes. Because if we could, we'd have done it already.
No, sorry. I mean like just polls, as in like no. What I don't mean as in the referendum vote. Sorry. What I mean is in like just any polls, like just polls in general.
That's what a referendum is. A referendum is not supposed to be binding.
Yeah.
That made Brexit an outlier, just the very fact it was taken to be binding. What a referendum does is it tests the mood of a nation, and then there's a vote on whether or not to do a thing. Like,
Jenny, remember to take your tablets, Akismad has said.
Do you know what? I actually forgot. Thank you, Akis. I think it's a bit late now, though, pal, but thank you.
He's always looking out for you.
He's looking out for me. Like,
Thank you for the
I have
£5 super chat.
migraine
But
meds
yeah,
and stuff that I usually take about this time at night, but it's too late. I'll never wake up in the morning if I
yeah,
take them. But thank you, Akis. I appreciate it, pal.
yeah. Russian money. These
Did
people are
she
Russian
just
billionaires.
pay to remind me to take my pill?
I'm sure. If I'm sure I would have seen it somewhere. I'm sure I would have seen it in there. I am trying. I obviously I can't respond to every single comment, but obviously but I do try to. I do every time, like while we're talking. Obviously, I'm trying to see what everyone says. Oh, obviously this one as well. Yeah, we have the son of a KGB officer in the Lords. Oh my God!
That's a
Like,
fact.
I
Yep.
just wish there was a way we could remove people out of that House of Lords. I hate that system. I
Well,
hate that system
Scots
so.
have been calling for the abolition of the House of Lords for a couple of centuries now.
Yeah, I'm a bit late to the party, but oh man,
Yeah.
I can't.
We've always seen them as like unelected folk that have way too much power over what we can and can't do. Like,
Yeah.
we've been calling for the dissolution of the House of Lords since at least the early 19th century, if not prior to that.
Yeah. Great stream, really enjoyed it. Thank you both. Thank you, Wolf Pet. Thank you for the $4.99 super
Cheers,
chat.
Darren.
Guys, do make sure you give some money to Random Scottish History. You know, her Patreon's in the description if you want to support her
This
as
guy.
well.
Don't listen to him. This guy.
Honestly, guys, you guys are awesome. Honestly, yeah, I really appreciate it. Now, honestly, if you guys have any more questions, feel free to throw them at us at anything at all. Like, anything at all. Feel free to ask. I go move away from the UK for a second, obviously, because this is. I don't know how much obviously you talk about it, but how much? I was wondering, like, what's happening? What's been happening in the Middle East? What's happening
Are you talking
in
about
Gaza in
Israel?
particular? Yeah. How do you feel about what's been happening there? Not just obviously by what's been happening since October the 7th, but just in general, like the history of the whole history of the Middle East. Like it just feels like when you look, like I have not dived. I'm not a historian, but given what I've learned and what I've gathered, it's like to me, it's like when are the Middle East going to be given a fucking break? That's kind of how I feel. Like they never seem to get a break yet, and it feels like the world interferes more with them than any other continent out there. Like
It kind of feels as if Israel was created with a view to destabilize the Middle East because the Middle East generally didn't have a corresponding religion,
yeah,
didn't have a corresponding idea of how to live their life and run their countries as us in the West. And Israel was created to kind of even up the thing a little bit. That I mean, they were typically designated the West Bulldog in the Middle East. They were there to be a voice on behalf of America and its subsidiary Britain, and so it was put there to kick up a fuss and almost kind of create tensions where there've always been tensions in the Middle East. Of course, there are right from the Crusades, but there was a point at which everything had pretty much settled down to a certain extent.
yeah,
You had, I mean, if you look at like pictures of Palestine back from after the World Wars, they had a great society. They had stuff working as they wanted it, you know, and it comes down to again making people's choices for them, depriving them of their options and their right to live how they want. I feel like that way every time America or Britain goes into a country, countries should have armies, they should have a military, but it should only ever be for defense. if you're going to another country with your army, you're on the offense, you're the aggressor, you're in their territory. And it's been that way a lot of late, which we saw from Iraq, etc. But for myself, I left home when I was 16. I left school, and the first place I lived on leaving these places was Faslane Peace Camp. I was there for about 9 months. And one of the demonstrations that I took part in Helensburgh, just like the next town along from Faslane, was something called the die-in. And it's where mainly women will go and lie on the ground as if they're dead. And we had like black veils over our faces and everything. And what they did that in aid of was sanctions against Israel as the aggressors to the Palestinians, that they were occupiers of territory that was not theirs, was never theirs, that they were expanding more than they had ever been given a right to. They were now infringing on people, and they were making the indigenous people of that area no longer have the same rights and abilities as they had previously. The Palestinians have no freedoms now. They are fully oppressed, and especially in areas like Gaza, the Golan Heights, etc. You've got a lot of encroachment has happened. So I've always been very pro-Palestinian. I'm always going to be on the side of the oppressed, because of course you should be. Like, no one has the right to have their freedoms curtailed by any other person. And I was told recently, a colleague in work was talking about, was it an actor from some series that I'd never watched? He was going to be dropped from the series because of a tweet that he put out like 10 years ago. And it turns out it was a tweet like coming up against Israel for what they were about.
Yeah.
And the rest of the cast went, well, if you're dropping him, we're not coming into work. You can forget it. So they're like, all right. But I said to him, I was like, if my bosses decided to use my tweets and social media as a way to drop me, if I was seen as too pro-Palestinian, I would be gone because I haven't stopped like tweeting and posting about the situation in Israel and in Palestine, to the point where my husband's uncle actually converted to Judaism to marry a lassie out in America. And they have a Jewish son, and they're very into what they believe and the life they've chosen to live. But I suddenly had him in my DMs on Facebook telling me that I was anti-Semitic, and how dare I, and I needed to take down some of the posts that I was posting. And I invited him to show me any single post that I'd posted that was anti-Semitic, that had me out against the Jewish people or the Jewish religion, because I just hadn't. Everything I was posting was anti-Zionist, anti-occupation, pro-Palestinian, that none of it was against him or his religion. And then he obviously felt like he wasn't winning the argument. So I had his wife coming at me in a separate message, a separate DM. She decided to weigh in. And I was like, did your husband just call you in for honors like against me? I invite you to do the same. Show me any post that I've posted that could even suggest that I'm anti-Semitic. To be pro-Palestinian, to be anti-occupation, isn't to be anti-Semitic. And they can play that game all they want. They can play the victims, because it's obviously worked for them until now. But it doesn't make them victims. They are the aggressors. They are the encroachers. They are the occupiers. They're denying people their choices and their freedoms, and no one has a right to do that to anyone else.
Yeah.
So, but it was the same with when the Scottish referendum was coming up. My dad blocked me, like, because
Yeah,
he didn't.
you
But
said
I
that.
also had his sister who lived down in England got me in the private messages, and she's like, "I can't believe you're so anti-English. How dare you? Blah blah blah." And I invited her to do the same. Show me any post that I've posted that even hints at anti-Englishness from my side. You'll not find it. And she just blocked me, like Alex's uncle and aunt did. Just blocked me. Couldn't
Mm,
show me what they were talking about because they were talking out their arses. But they will play that game. They'll play the victim
yeah.
because it's the only argument they have. They can't justify what they're doing. I mean, even Hamza Yousaf came out recently saying that as far as the UN was concerned, like over 700 newborn babies had been killed
Yeah.
in Palestine. How do you justify that? How is anyone on the side of the faction that made that a reality? Baffles me.
Yeah. It's yeah, I like well, I tell you what sometimes when I'm covering, and those who obviously watch the Snowflake Watch on Wednesday evenings, they know exactly what I'm talking about because I've covered I don't know if you've heard that podcast about the two that there's a podcast of two Israelis basically saying about basically just wipe them out or something along those lines basically, but you keep hearing that from some of those people and I'm just thinking to myself like you do realize what you're implying. You do realize you're implying that you are talking about wiping out an entire population, an entire population here, and you guys don't think there's anything wrong with that in any way, shape, or form. Like nobody, like as far as like nobody here is saying like what happened on October the 7th was in any way justified by Hamas.
But
But
the
that does,
idea that it only got going, that people only became aware of the situation because of October 7th, this has been a long-standing thing.
yeah,
I'm telling you, I was protesting on behalf of the Palestinian people at the age of 16. I'm 40 now. This isn't a brand new thing. This has been on the go for longer than most of us have been alive.
yeah. I mean, I've even covered the West Bank before October the 7th as well, and it's gotten worse since October the 7th. It's gotten worse. But again, like I say it so many times whenever I cover it, it's like I feel like I'm rinse and repeat when I talk about it because it's like the international I feel like the internet, the ICJ and the international community, they say they condemn these and then there's votes and all this kind of thing, and then just US just does have their veto power and just like no, you can't do anything, shut up, and it's just like what's the fucking point? Like
That actually freaked me out a lot because the person in the UN that was vetoing all of that was Nikki Haley. And when she entered the presidential race, oh, that freaked me out. Because I thought if she gets anywhere, if she makes any headway in the presidential race, she is not only worse than Trump, she's smarter than Trump and would know better how to achieve a lot of what Trump attempted to achieve in his 4 years. She was a scary lady.
Yeah, I don't expect the status quo to change. I mean, obviously, I'm the very possibility of Trump winning still is. I know it's.
It's not even a possibility. The huge
No.
uprising in favor of.
You cannot rule out Trump, even because you just can't.
Do you know what?
Can't.
You're right. Too many of us did that.
You just can't rule out Trump.
Yeah.
Like the thing is, I don't like. I want to rule it out. I really, really do. But there was just like I keep seeing polls where they are even, and there's still a group of people who are undecided. And I keep seeing this like, how are you fucking undecided? The guy literally said in the debate that they're eating dogs and they're eating cats, and
do you know there was a really good sign, like that Trump likely won't get in, and that's down in the retirement places throughout Florida. do you remember how they came out in favor of Trump? And they were
Yeah.
all in their golf carts and wee yachts and things, out doing wee parades in favor of Trump. They're now doing that for Harris.
Yeah. Well, there's also the other thing as well. The difference between this
That's a good
presidential,
sign.
the difference between this election, obviously, and the last one was nobody knew what Trump was. Everyone
That's
knows what
it.
Trump is now. So it's either a case of you either buy into everything that he's doing, or
Yep.
you apply common sense as like, okay, I don't like Kamala Harris. There are things I don't like about her, but I do care about American democracy, so I'm probably going to go with Harris. But
let's not have a fascist in the hot seat, especially
Yeah.
not one that's telling you he's going to be a dictator on day one. Like
Project 2025,
that's
and
it.
yeah, no more Justice Department, no more FBI, no more
He's
CIA.
literally telling them what he's going to do.
Yeah.
And very little of it is good or beneficial to the voters. So
And then you'd have a vice
people
president.
just have to believe him when he says
A
the
vice
things.
president will exterminate all cats in America, which would be heartbreaking.
Can you imagine though? Like,
He would.
that in itself would just be riots.
Oh my god! Round up all the cats. We're gonna round them all up, and it's just like, no, don't touch the cats. Oh Jesus!
It's just bizarre, right? American politics is bizarre, but again, I attribute to what we're seeing to the inability to access education freely.
Yeah,
that there are not a huge amount of critical thinkers.
Yeah,
or folk that are progressive. I mean, you've got the right wing saying it out loud, saying that if people go to college, university, they'll become liberals. Don't you know? They might become more progressive just because they learned a thing and learned how to think about a thing and see the end result or the potential end results of an action,
Yeah.
Like,
well, I didn't go to college or university, but I thought I turned out all right.
yes.
I do. I always say that about myself. Like, yeah, I didn't do too bad. I've not done too bad.
No, you didn't, darling.
Suzanne, it's good to see you there. And if I know that normally I say hello to everyone, but obviously I do appreciate everyone and all the regular faces and new faces here tonight. I appreciate it. You have to remember it's America. America Harris one is a woman. 2, parents were immigrant at a time of her birth, living in the US, and 3, she's a mixed race. Hits a lot of bigots buttons for not voting for her. Yes, it does hit a lot of bigots buttons.
Suzanne, do you feel though that you have a plethora of bigots? Do you feel like the bigots in your country outweigh those that are more progressively minded? Would be my question in return. Because if they don't outweigh the most of the population, I don't think the bigots are going to really get a say in this next election.
Prosecutor or rapist? Yeah, that's pretty much it, isn't it? I mean, a guy with 34 felonies, and then you had the prosecutor. It's great. I
she did a cracking job of standing up there and going, I have prosecuted the rapist, I have prosecuted the fraudsters, I have prosecuted, and she's taken all of Trump's boxes.
The best. For me, still one of the best things in that debate was when she just turned to the camera and said, "I invite you to go to a Donald Trump rally."
Yeah,
I heard that and I was like, "Oh shit, she's going in! She's going fucking in!" And she was just like, "You're gonna have her." Because it's going to be an interesting thing, and you're going to fall asleep. You're going to leave, and Trump's like, "They don't leave. They don't fall asleep. They don't leave my rallies. I have the greatest rallies. Don't leave me."
But then he can't help contradicting himself. He keeps going, "The debate was rigged, but we won the debate, so it wasn't rigged."
Well, that's why he had
because it was rigged.
That's why he ran to Sean Hannity after the debate in the was it the scrum or whatever they had. Like he to get on Fox to basically imply, no, it was really great. It was a great debate and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, to try and save face, for it all. But
And he's like, if a boxer wins the fight, they don't go for a rematch. Only a loser goes for a rematch. I won't be debating her again. Yeah, good try, mate.
Okay, okay, sure.
That's
Okay,
not how it
sure.
works. Like,
Oh God. All
yeah.
right, last question because we're coming up to 10 p.m. A scary question. Do you think the inbreeding of the so-called British elite is a factor in the what's the word? I can't say it.
Decadence.
The decadence of the country. Um,
No, that's purely nepotism. That's nepotism rather than inbreeding. It's the
I
nepo babies
this
like
this is
running on daddy's coattails.
this is
think.
what I think. There's always you know what I think the riots, the recent riots in England, were a reminder of not just of the kind of dangerous people that we have in England, but also a reminder of just how many good people there are in England as well.
Yep.
And I think that for like the I people can disagree with me on this, but I thought Keir Starmer handled the riots as best as he possibly can in that situation. I don't know if the Conservatives would have handled it any better, in my opinion. But when I look back on that, for me, what I generally loved was how coming together the people was to stand up to these riots. And I'll never that day where all the anti rioters came out was one of the was actually made me feel for a long time. It was one of that Wednesday. It was Wednesday night, wasn't it, when they basically kicked them out. That was it was a long time I felt a little sense of pride and proudness to live in this country, because it reminded people, hey, we're not like the media always paints us as bad and all this kind of stuff.
Yep.
No, it's not fucking true. There's so many good people, you just don't hear enough about it.
Yeah.
And what happened was
But
a
that's
prime example. It's
because
just like,
the bigots are quite a shouty lot. If you
yeah,
hadn't
and
noticed. They're
they
quite
get more
loud.
yeah, they get so many voices. But yeah, what happened in Brighton, what happened in so many places, and and I think on that night, yeah, I covered so many different towns of people coming together. Like,
Mhm.
even though there was no sign of any of them turning up, there were because they all ran away scared shitless, because they knew that there were loads of anti-fascists out there to basically say, you're not fucking tearing our towns down, you're not tearing our homes down, you're not tearing our cars down, you're not tearing our high streets down. We're going to stand up to you. And they did. They standed up in so many places, and it was needed. It was needed
Mhm.
to remind people of that. And it just felt like a long time since I've seen and felt that way. And I think I'll never forget there was one picture I'll remember on the night. I will come to your super chat in a moment, Ruth, I promise. There was one picture I'll never forget on that. I think it was on the night, and I think it was up in Blackpool or something, or somewhere up there, where there was basically no one, and there was like five of the fascist guys. They had nowhere to protest. They just protested on a roundabout. And there was just of them on this roundabout.
We claim the
Saying,
roundabout for the
yeah,
people.
no, taking back control of the magic roundabout. That was the term I used,
Yeah.
and that was the, and then obviously you saw in Brighton like the 3-4 fascist rioters who turned up against the 10,000 anti ones, and it's just like yeah. And it was just silence from all. It just, and all those who were bigging it up, and like the Tommy Robinsons, the Andrew Tates, the Nigel Farages, they were silent because they knew that England is not fascist, because you think it is and it's not. But yeah, Ruth, thank you so much for £5 super chat. We're pretty much done here, but I'll just read this out. Absolutely superb. Thanks, Jenny. I learned a lot. Good call, Reganelite. Hello, lovely lot in the chat. Too busy listening and joining. That's all fine. It's all good. We appreciate anybody coming in. Jenny, Random
Again,
Scottish
don't
history.
die on us. You're almost
I
done.
won't. I want to say massive, yeah. I want to say massive thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Let's do
Anytime,
this.
darling.
Let's do this again sometime. What do you say?
I'm into
Yeah,
it.
yeah. We will definitely do this again sometime. I'll say this here, guys, actually, because I've actually been thinking about this. I've been thinking about getting maybe once a month or once every couple of months, like a round table on the channel, a group round table every couple of months or so. Get a bunch of YouTubers to come together and talk about politics or talk about anything. So
Yep.
if I do something like that, I will definitely let you know and give you plenty of notice in advance, and definitely will have you on board for that. But we'll definitely do a chat like this again. That is for sure. And just to remind everybody, what's your YouTube channel again? Just for those who don't know, remind
It's
everyone.
at Random Scottish History, and the website is rsh.scot. Podcasts, books published, videos. There's plenty out there, varying media. All of the information is free. I'm a big proponent of free information, so you're not going to hit any paywalls, no adverts, nothing like that. The books that we've published, every single piece of information in them is available on the site to read for free. Really, what you're getting as an extra on buying a book is Alex's artwork throughout, which doesn't appear on the website anywhere, because we thought we might as well give people a little kind of extra bonus if they go ahead and buy one of the books. The books themselves are as cheap as Amazon will let me publish them for. So just to make them easily accessible, have at it. Like, gorge yourself on Scottish history. I encourage you.
Yeah. And Giles put the YouTube and her Patreon. Both the links are in the live
Thank
chat.
you so much, darling.
But her links tree is also in the description. So if you want to see all of it, it's all there for you guys and girls, if you haven't seen it already. But yes, I think we're done here for tonight. What do you guys think? Are we done here for tonight?
The octopus is definitely on board with
Ollie's
it
not
being
in
the
there. Ollie's turned away. That's not like Ollie. Ollie's turned away. Like Ollie's normally like looking.
Listen, my corpse has fallen asleep. She's wondering how I'm still talking, like keeping her awake at the moment. Like she just wants to get to her kit.
Don't trust
you know?
Pingu. Pingu's a communist. Pingu's a communist. Oh, there I go. Right, guys, I want to say massive thank you guys for coming along. Thank you guys for all your comments. A massive thank you to everyone who has gifted memberships and super chats tonight. Really appreciate
Thank you very much.
Appreciate the support, guys. I really do. It has been I really do appreciate all the support, guys. And I will be back tomorrow at 7 p.m. with the Snowflake conflict. So if you guys want to come and join me for that, we'll talk about there's obviously what's been happening in Lebanon. Obviously, we'll be following up on that, which has been absolutely terrible. So I'll be following up on that and more on the war in Ukraine as well as other conflicts. So if you guys want to talk about hear more about that, please do join me tomorrow at 7 p.m. there. Stop dying, Regan. But if not, guys, obviously I'll see you guys in other live streams and whatnot as well. But if I don't see you then, I'll be back on Monday. But do have a lovely rest of your night and have a good Friday as well as a great weekend, everyone. Normally, I would hit the outro, but I think should I try and hit the outro button because it only got 10 seconds. Yes, I'll do. Right, let me do the outro. Right. If you haven't already, please hit the like button. We greatly appreciate it. Share this across social media so others are notified of this live stream. If you haven't subscribed to our channels already, please do so because it really does help us out. And if you want to go one step further, financial support both of us and the work that we do, you can join our Patreon down in the links below, or you can even join my YouTube membership for just 99p. So thank you all so much for watching, and we hope to catch you all very, very soon.